Many people seem to have an opinion about Sweden, the country of IKEA, ABBA and meatballs, of quiet people, snow, forests and the state-run liquor store. To some we're a paradise, to others a country in decline. Sweden is a land of contrasts and constant change, warmth and cold. So today we talk about the myths, the culture and the reality, from Vikings and welfare to freedom of speech. This video is about trying to understand Sweden. The image of Sweden has always carried a certain weight. Once we were brutal Vikings, plunderers and barbarians, but the truth is that Vikings were also merchants, travelers and lawmakers. They built networks, exchanged ideas and signed agreements long before the word globalization existed. They were as much east as west, sailing to England, Ireland and France, but also down the Russian rivers towards Constantinople and the Black Sea. Ironically, and of their descendants would become some of Europe's most powerful kings and queens. At home in the north, they held village meetings, where people spoke, listened, and reached agreements. That's where the roots of our democracy were born. We weren't just warriors, we were survivors. Sweden endured by adapting and working together, and still does today. Swedes are said to be cold, quiet, and emotionless. We don't talk in elevators, we don't greet on our neighbors, we just exist. It's about respect. In Sweden, getting too close can feel rude. We show warmth, slowly but sincerely. Out of that silence grew our sense of equality and fairness. Here, feminism is often so natural that it simply feels like common sense. In the 1970s, Sweden was seen as a land where everything was allowed, fueled by films and tabloids eager to sell that image. But we were simply early with openness, more curious than scandalous. From the outside, Sweden often looks clean and perfect. Yes, many things work here, but we're never claimed to be a utopia. We have our problems, crime, segregation and political polarization. To many abroad, we're still the land of IKEA, ABBA and meatballs, a people's home, where everyone says lagom, but reality is more complex. Even so, our institutions remain strong. We have a democracy that has survived crisis, cultural clashes and change, no matter what some politicians claim. In the end, we have no other choice but to make the best of it. Here comes a classic, the idea that Swedes can't handle alcohol, that we drink like Vikings the moment that the state liquor store closes. And yes, there's a grain of truth in that. In the 19th century, Sweden had a massive drinking problem, but eventually we realized it wasn't sustainable. Today we have one of the most regulated alcohol systems in the world, and it works. Young people drink less than ever before, and we drink more often to socialize than to escape. Alcohol, much like fika, is part of our food culture, something difficult to remove entirely. There is some concern that yard sales may alter the balance between freedom and responsibility. In recent years, international media have painted Sweden as a country at war. Bombings in Sweden, the headlines shout. Yes, there have been an unusual number of explosions and shootings, but they are the result of gang activities, not a nation in chaos. Sweden still have a low crime rates compared to many other countries. But Sweden is a connected country with eyes on it. Foreign journalists love to exaggerate, and at home, some voices love to paint things darker than they are. Yet that shows democracy still works. Here you are allowed to exaggerate without being silenced. Earlier this year, the US Vice President Vance claimed that freedom of speech in Europe, including Sweden, is weakening. He referred to court cases surrounding Quran burnings. But in Sweden we don't like seeing books burned, no matter what they contain. It reminds us of something dark, when the Nazis burned what they didn't agree with. We defend freedom of expression, but we also draw a clear line at hate speech. Attacking people for their faith or origin isn't freedom, it's hate. Sweden has one of the world's oldest laws on press freedom. dating back to 1766, but that law demands balance, freedom and responsibility. We question power, whoever holds it. Politicians, royals, media, companies, no one is spared. Even Spotify's founder faces criticism for investing in military AI. In Sweden, holding power to account is almost a national sport. Sweden sees itself as a humanitarian superpower, a country that stands for democracy, equality and peace. We welcome refugees, sent aid and defended human rights. But the image isn't without cracks. But we also failed in integration, in self-reflection, in living up to our ideals. Sweden is a democracy, but not a finished one. We're still in the process, testing, questioning and learning. And maybe that's exactly what keeps our democracy alive. The courage to face our flaws without losing faith. During the refugee crisis of 2015, Sweden accepted more people per capita than almost any other country in Europe. Over 160,000 people asked for asylum here in 1 year. And yes, it caused problems. Crowded housings, busy schools and towns struggling to cope. But already the following year, Sweden began to pull the brakes. Border controls were reintroduced, the rules tightened, the politics shifted. We didn't close our doors, but we tried to find a balance. A common misconception abroad is that you just come to Sweden and get benefits. Sweden has always built on give and take on the social contract. Welfare isn't just about receiving, it's about contributing and taking part. As King Gustav VI Adolf said, duty above all. About how we all, regardless of background, are part of the same shared story. Many say Sweden has collapsed, but we're still standing. With strong institutions and a society trying to hold together even when the winds are rough. Then there's a climate. No, not every Swede is a climate activist. There are plenty who dislike, even hate Greta Thunberg. Loudly, on social media, everywhere. But even if not everyone joins climate marches, many still care deeply about the environment in their everyday lives. In fact, Sweden is a world champion in recycling. 99% of all household waste is taken care of. With a little more coffee and fika, we somehow managed to fix almost anything. Now to Sweden's justice system. Elon Musk and Donald Trump Jr. have both criticized the Swedish ruling in the Skellefteå case, where is a man not deported after a conviction. But much of the debate is based on misunderstanding. Today, Swedish law defines many forms of sexual contact as rape. Sweden has one of the most legally secure systems in the world. Courts try to weigh evidence and testimony carefully, which sometimes leads to lighter sentences than the public expects. In 2018, the consent law was introduced, a reform that established that sex without consent is rape, and more reforms are on the way. To many abroad, Sweden is still seen as a socialist state, sometimes even as a country teetering on the edge of communism. But that's a misunderstanding. Sweden was never built on the planned economy of communism, but on something else entirely. A mixed economy where the market and the state cooperate. The Swedish welfare model was born out of pragmatism, not ideology. It was about creating security without smoothing initiative. A state that took responsibility while allowing people and businesses to grow. That Sweden was governed by social democrats for almost half a century didn't mean the country was socialist in the classic sense, not a dictatorship or a one-party system. It was more about stability, a long compromise between labor and capital. In the 1970s, power also shifted to more conservative governments. Since then, Sweden has alternated, but democracy has stayed strong. Still, the image lives on. Especially in international debates, in recent years it has been twisted even further by populist movements that love to describe Sweden as a socialist failure or a chaotic state. But that picture often says more about their agenda than about reality here. Because Sweden is perhaps one of the most democratic nations in the world, so open that even movements seeking to dismantle democracy are allowed to speak. However, it has begun to reach its maximum voter support. In reality, Sweden doesn't function through propaganda. It functions through compromise. One of the strangest myths about Sweden concerns our children, the most precious we have. Some claim that Swedish authorities kidnap them, place them in secret homes, or even turn them into hamburgers at McDonald's. It sounds absurd, and it is, but these kinds of stories have spread for years, often from people or media who don't understand how our system works, or who want to discredit it to stir public opinion. In reality, it's about the social services, a public agency whose duty, like in other Western countries, is to protect children when they risk harm. But the system isn't perfect. Sometimes decisions are misunderstood, communication fails, or trust between families and authorities breaks down. And that's often where the rumors are born, from genuine fear and frustration, amplified by mistrust and misinformation. Behind all of this lies something we can probably all agree on. Our children are the most important we have. And today, being a parent may be harder than ever. The world has become more anxious, more digital, more unpredictable. Children grew up in climate crisis, wars, algorithms, and endless information. It's no wonder many parents feel worried, wanting to protect their kids from everything. Sweden isn't unique in this, but we try, as best as we can, to put the child's best interest first. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we don't, but the will is there to build safety, responsibility, and hope for a future, because in Sweden, no one should be left alone, especially not a child. No, Sweden isn't perfect, but neither is it a country in decay. We evolve, we learn, and we keep holding on to justice, freedom, and democracy. And our culture, Nordic, quiet and stubborn, is ours. It isn't about hate or division, it's about community, equality, and conversation. You're also people who love differences, dialects, accents, new expressions and voices. All of them are part of the Swedish story. From Tornedalen's Hoja to newcomers learning the language with pride. They make Sweden richer, more vibrant, more us. And when we're not buying tickets to concerts at home, we travel the world. To explore, to cooperate, to create new connections. Culture, music, and trade have always been our soft superpowers. A counterbalance to the forests, mountains, industry, and the technology that built this country. And in the middle of all this stands a man cutting ribbons. Our dutiful king, sometimes criticized but always present. He represents the nation, the realm. For generations has built bridges between Sweden and the world. There is something both old-fashioned and deeply human in that image. A reminder of continuity in a country constantly changing. That naturally leads us to something else that puts Sweden on the world map, the Nobel Prize. Every year, scientists, thinkers, and creative minds gather in Stockholm, not just to be honored, but to remind the world of the value of knowledge, science and peace. It may be the clearest symbol of what Sweden strives to be, a small country with big ideas. The Nobel Peace Prize, however, is always awarded in Norway to fulfill Alfred Nobel's wish. The union between Sweden and Norway still existed when he wrote this will. He must have had a crystal ball. He also had political leaders and voices who dared to stand up for their beliefs, even when it cost them their lives. Olof Palme, Anna Lindh, and others have been threatened, hated, and even targeted for murder, simply for defending democracy, climate, or human rights. It reminds us that democracy can never be taken for granted. It must be defended, cared for, and practiced every single day. From the Viking Age meetings to today's parliament, we try to solve things together, sometimes loudly, sometimes quietly, but always with a will to understand. And part of that is to defending others' right to disagree, because freedom means nothing if it only applies to those we agree with. So no, Sweden isn't perfect, but it stands tall, keeps talking, and keeps believing in humanity. Because perhaps there's something more important than the word lagom, and stronger than our love of fika, that we care, that we take responsibility, stand up for one another, even for those we don't fully understand, that we never stop believing that things can get better, and maybe that's exactly what makes Sweden Swedish. I probably missed a lot. Red cottages with white corners, our holiday traditions, the latest music, some viral trend, or the current world situation. And yes, I almost skipped the whole story of our kings and queens. But also something that might say even more about us, our clubs, our sports, and all those people with passionate hobbies who keep things alive. Let's do a list. It could be choir singers, volunteers, role players, beekeepers, PC builders, car mechanics, hunters, anglers, fitness fanatics, travelers, do-yourselfers, knitters, home gardeners, animal lovers, cooks, freighters, model train builders, or stamp collectors. I almost forgot gamers. And each of these pictures is a mixture of truth, prejudices, and stereotypes, small stories we tell about each other, and sometimes about ourselves. Reading between the lines, we're an active, creative people, both nature and technology minded. Maybe that also reflects the Vikings we once were, curious about the world and quick to try a new path. But at some point, like our red Santa, it's time to tie the sack closed. While making this video, I learned things I never even thought about. Things buried deep in my Swedish soul, that I now see with new eyes. Like how immigrants sometimes work harder than we do, to master that Swedish art of being distant, cool, yet kind. And perhaps what surprised me most is how much Sweden has changed. Once seen as almost socialist, with a strong state and collective responsibility. Today, we're one of the most market-oriented countries in the Western world, in some industries even freer than the United States. We try to solve many social challenges other nations still wrestle with. From welfare and equality to environment and education. Sometimes it worked, sometimes not. But the will to innovate has always been there. It looks like we're combining the best of both worlds, a kind of free collectivism. Maybe that's why the pendulum sometimes swings back when people long for security, control and shared solutions. Even in schools, more and more now want less market influence and more focus on equality and quality, a sort of elastic rebound within the Swedish model. And to you watching, feel free to mention another myth, prejudice or idea about Sweden that you think deserves to be discussed. After all, this is just my truth, and I love to hear yours. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to join me for more stories about Swedish culture, society and history, and occasionally something more technical, please consider subscribing to the channel. And why not have a fika in the meantime? If you want to see more of what I do, you'll find links to my other channels below. Take care and see you soon.